The objective of this Young India Scholars Conference on Tibetan Studies is to give a platform to Indian scholars who are working on Tibetan studies because for any narrative to be shaped on the Tibetan side of the narrative that we have, it's important that we provide platform where scholars can present their papers, discuss on the findings, and then bring out papers, publications that would be distributed or disseminated across other academic platforms, which will naturally, as Professor Kondapalli said, will shape the narrative on Tibetan issue as per the Tibetan narrative, not as per the Chinese narrative. That's the goal.
This is the seventh conference of its kind, and I think it's very important for Tibet Policy Institute to interact with other think tanks, other scholars, other researchers to find out their opinions about Tibet, their studies on Tibet, and particularly this kind of conference where you have a lot of young Indian scholars studying Tibetan issues and coming out with papers and write-ups. Eventually, when they grow up and become much more scholarly, then we will already have friends in the intellectual community who understand the Tibetan issues from the basic to what is happening today. So I think that kind of resource is very important for networking, for building up awareness on Tibet, and these scholars in turn will be spreading awareness in their own communities, in their own sections of society where they will be able to reach out, and I think this will help in the overall creation of awareness on Tibet and the Tibetan struggle, which is always a very good component of, it has to be a good component of our movement, where we need support from different sections. And scholars are always at the forefront of coming out with research papers, which also becomes policy guidelines for governments. In India and now in European countries, more and more think tanks are coming up. But unfortunately, in developing countries like Africa and Latin America, they are still lacking in understanding China. There is no group or think tanks to study China and inform the politicians about the motivations of the Chinese government and the subtle pressures they put on you, using all the multilateral forums because of their investment in those countries. So it works in different ways. So it's very important to understand China from a scholarly perspective, and then also give feedback to governments. That's why when I travel to South America also, I recommend them to form think tanks to study China, so that politicians don't have the time to study. They need to be informed by scholars and researchers, their outcomes that will influence the policy. I think these kind of conferences are very, very important, not only for today, but in the future.
My paper deals with how China manipulates Tibet's identity, especially in journal articles we see in, like, say, Elsevier, Springer, and other major journal articles. So here I see since 2021 onwards, we see the word Tibet is no longer used in English as an English term. Rather, it is replaced by Xizang, Xizang. So it's not just in articles related to Tibet in general, political science or social science related, rather also in science articles. For example, see, they find a new species in Tibet of botanical or zoological. Even then they use Xizang, except they use Tibetan as a word only when it is they cannot use Xizangan. Then only they use Tibet. Then only they use Tibetan. Otherwise, it's predominantly Tibet is replaced by Xizang in most conversation. And so I took some sample study of some 30 articles in the past 4 years, and I tried to analyze how the word Tibet is being replaced by Xizang. And I see the authors who are penning these articles. They are almost all of them are Han Chinese, as we learned during the lecture, keynote address today. And then their affiliation. They are all affiliated to the party state institutions with significant funding. So they have to carry the party state narrative in those journals. And since international journal articles carry weight in the long term, like, people quote them. So if, for example, you see in Xinjiang, Xinjiang, Xin is new, Chiang is frontier, new frontier. So it's a new name given by the Chinese to that region. Earlier it is East Turkestan. But over decades we call them Xinjiang, and now everyone calls it Xinjiang. In the same way, today we know it as a Tibet. But over decades, young people will remember this place only as Xizang. So it means the identity is slowly injected in a way that people will forget this place. And once the name is changed, then everything associated with this will be gradually changed. So in institutions, in foreign institutions especially, which are funded by Chinese, or those fellows who work with them have received training in China. I mean, there's no problem in going to China and lending their perspective, but merely applying the same without rational thinking. I think that's where the issue arises. So you only listen to the one side of the story and then accept it as it is. So when you present the region as Xizang instead of Tibet, Xizang, Xi is west, Tsang is treasure, literal meaning. So when you present that as a one, so it carries the Chinese narrative and everything embedded within the Chinese discourse. And then we also see within South Asia as well, Nepal, Sri Lanka, some lawmakers also start using, they received a delegation from Xizang. So, and then that shapes the narrative, because that also strengthens the legitimacy of that region, which, why don't they say it for other, like say Yunnan, Guangdong, other regions in China? They could also say for that, but they actually tend to do it for Xizang, because that once they get a legitimacy from the foreign people, I think it's part of the 2013 Xi Jinping policy as well. Tell China stories well. So here in the China story, Tibet or in Xizang in their through them has to be told in a way that suits their narrative. So I think they are doing their well in a way that comes at a huge disadvantage to Tibet's history, identity in the long term. And if young Tibetans, also young students, scholars from across the world, if they are not well aware of these narrative warfare, I think just like what from East Turkestan to Xinjiang, from Tibet to Xizang is not a long story. It's going to happen in a short period, and that's going to be very unfortunate.
The paper I'm presenting here is about the migration trend and of the Karnataka state in particular, focused about the 5 major settlements, Lungsam, Thundiling, Dikilarsu, Thundiling, all the settlements in Karnataka in specific. And the migration trend that I'm going to understand is from the Tibet to India, and then India to Western countries in terms of traditional migration. The first one as a traditional exile, as India is referred to, and then followed by transnational migration. As in transnational migration, as a term itself in the scholarly words, we can be expressed like the movement of people into another international boundary, but keeping a ties and social context and cultural relevance to the country of origin, or maybe country they first came from. As in this reference, I'm referring to India or maybe to Tibet. So around this, I have done my research paper, which I'm presenting here about the migration trend. So trend in specific and how it induced the population change over the time, considering the TDS, Tibetan Demographic Survey, which was first conducted in 1998 by Planning Council, established in 1988. So their survey clubbed with the 2009 TDS survey, Demographic Survey 2009, and followed by SART's report that studies the Tibetan diaspora outside Southeast Asia or traditional exile. So based upon these 3 findings, I have conducted my migration study and the diaspora and the population, this one, migration-induced population changed.
We are very happy to say that the successive Young Indian Scholars Conference has, I won't say produced, but I would say nurtured and shaped many young Indian scholars who are right now working as associate professors at different universities, assistant professors, and also senior research scholars at different policy institutions. So this is the what you would say the contribution or success of the successive conference that we held, and also if there are many more Indian scholars who are expert on Tibetan studies, this will naturally provide the Indian government and the policymakers greater resources from where they can pull in information. So it has been, we are very happy that there has been great result. And also in the future, we also have this 50-50 ratio of participants every year, meaning 50% of the participants from who have already participated, so there's continuation, but also at the same time we try to bring 50% of new participants so that there's a transition, and both continuation and transition, meaning each year we are creating many more Indian scholars on Tibetan studies.